Well, so have you ever been interviewed in any way before?
Not that I can recall.
Here, we'll have you scoot in, or I'll push this closer to you. Well, so this is gonna kind of capture everything about you. So it's not like the military part of it is the core focus. Like that's why I'm doing it. But it's also to just document your entire life story. So all the way from being born all the way to where you're at now. And then selfishly, like everybody that I've done, most of them have been family. So there's kind of more of a vested interest because I want to really take care of those family stories.
Yeah.
And so Dad and I were just talking about it the other day, and we're like selfishly, like we really want to be able to get to talk to you for an hour or two and get your whole life story, because it's not necessarily just your story, but also memories of other family members that are gone now. So,
which most of them are.
Yeah. So your story is like of the utmost importance to get, and you have a fascinating perspective because, you know, when I don't remember how old Grandma was when I was born, but you know how close I was with her. You know, I'll probably get to hear a lot of stories about her in this.
We were pretty close.
That I've never heard before. So we'll just start all the way back at the beginning from when you were born, where you were born at, and then what it was like to grow up in that generation, and just your entire, tell everybody about your upbringing and childhood, how the whole family situation. Probably a lot to talk about, but
So you want to talk about where I was born?
yeah, where, when, and then your just what it was like growing up.
Yeah, September 1, 1936. That's when I was born. I was born right here in Madison County, but I wasn't born in a hospital. They had a clinic. It was out by Mounds Park. It's called Hoppus's Clinic, and that's where I was born. The building is still there, but it's an apartment complex now. So that's where I was born. It really was a lot different world back then. I had a lot of cousins that were born out there too. St. John's Hospital was a real small place, you know, really small. So it wasn't unusual that people would go to these clinics. They had one in downtown Anderson. It was called the Citizens Bank Clinic. They had a lot of people, kids were born up there, and a lot of them were born out there in Hoppus's Clinic. But, you know, people didn't have cars. They walked just about every place they went. We had a terrific bus system, though. You could stand on the corner, and for a nickel, you could go anywhere in Anderson. Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And they were making money. So, and you know, a lot of kids they rode the bus to school. It cost them a nickel to go catch the bus to go to school in the morning and come home. But I didn't do much of that. I didn't have any money, and my dad and we didn't get along very good. And he wanted you to beg him for the money, and I wouldn't do it. And the rest of the kids did. They didn't care. I guess I had too much pride, too much of an individual. But anyway, I'd walk right past them. They'd be standing on the corner. It was only a mile to the school. So, and another thing was too, I had a paper out in the wintertime when I was a teenager, and so I'd get up at, I don't know, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and run my paper route, come home, fix my own breakfast, get ready for school, and just go to school. And they were standing out on the corner waiting on the bus, and I'd just walk right past them. And part of the time I rode a bicycle, but you know, in the wintertime, that's not a good idea usually. You can freeze to death on a motorcycle, on a bicycle in the wintertime. So I didn't do very much of that. But when the weather was fit, that's what I did. But then I didn't finish high school either. I quit school when I was 16. I was a sophomore. And you know, I was the only person in my any of the Davises that ever got a college education.
Yeah.
So when I got out of the service, I wanted to go to work down in Columbus, Indiana, with what's the name of that? I can't think of that factory down there. But anyway, I went down there and I put my application in. The guy said, "Go back home, get a GED, and I'll hire you." And I said, "Okay." So I came back to Anderson. And you couldn't get a GED from Anderson back then. So what they did was they had a high school in Elwood, Indiana. And if you were in Madison County and you wanted a GED, you had to go to Elwood to take the test. No preparation, just go take it. So that's what I did. I passed. And all those things do is they just show that you were capable of doing it. That's all it proves anyway. In fact, when I was in college, I had a professor told me once, I told him, I said, "I didn't finish high school." And he said, "You didn't miss anything." So, he didn't have a very high opinion of our educational system. But anyway, I got a bachelor's degree and a teacher's license from Anderson College. And then that's before they became a university. And I went to Ball State for about 3 years or so, or 4. I got a master's degree, so.
A high school dropout gets a master's degree and becomes a teacher.
Isn't that something? Not me. I said, surely not.
So what was the family situation like growing up? Like how many siblings, and what was kind of the dynamic of you and your siblings growing up?
It was dynamic, all right. Well, to start with, when I was young, up until 1948, we didn't have our own place. We rented. But we rented this big old yellow house on the wide street there in Anderson. And believe me, it was like a family reunion every day. Because my cousins, some of them stayed with us while their parents worked. And so when school was over, they'd pile into our house. And sometimes it'd be one of them, sometimes it'd be several of them. And they'd just hang around and wait till their folks showed up. So we really were pretty close. And then Anderson was a real small town back then. It was only 1.5 miles across either way,
wow.
North, south, east, and west. So, I had a friend of mine that tried to tell me how to get around in Anderson one time back in the 1990s. I said, "David, I bet I know more about Anderson than you do. I bet I've been in every alley and every street in Anderson. So, I know how to get around in Anderson. I don't need you to give me direction." But like I said earlier, everybody walked or they rode the bus. And all the businesses were downtown. And so if you wanted to do any kind of business, you just caught the bus and went downtown. And the stores, they stayed open 6 days a week. They were closed on Sunday and they were closed on Wednesday afternoon. Banks, everything, they shut down afternoon. So that was really different. But I tell you, the thing when I was together with all my cousins, I didn't realize it at the time, but I really fell in love with all of them. That's the truth. I didn't know it.
It's probably just kind of normal to you.
It's normal to me, yeah. But later on, when I started figuring things out, I thought, man, how did we get along? Of course, we didn't always get along either. You want to hear an interesting story about when I was 10 years old?
Sure.
We used to go to southern Indiana in Jennings County. My grandfather owned 350 acres down there on a farm. And then my aunt and uncle owned a farm right next to it, and it was another 150 acres. So that's what we did. We just ran the hollers down there in the hills. So once a year, my mother would pack us all up, and we'd go down to Jennings County, and we'd stay down there for a week and pick blackberries. I told everybody, I said, "I'm the blackberry picking champion of the world." I was only 10 years old. So we was down there one time picking blackberries, and we'd pick berries all week. And my mother and my aunt, I guess they took pity on us, and we were all worn out. So they went out by themselves and started picking berries and left us kids there at the house by ourselves. I didn't know they was gone. When I woke up, though, I realized, we were just there by ourselves. And we were pretty independent, all of us. You about had to be back then. Yeah. That's the way we were raised. And so I just went in the kitchen and got me a bowl and poured me some cereal. Now, we came up in a generation where things were rationed. In World War II, you couldn't buy a bottle of pop. You couldn't buy a bag of sugar. You had to have tokens. And
you said you were born in 36?
Yeah.
So this is 10 years old, so 46. So this is right after the war.
Yeah. So all these habits we developed during the war, we still had them. And so my cousin was a girl, Annabelle. She was a wonderful person, but she thought because she was 2 years older than me that she was my boss when my folks weren't around. Well, anyway, I poured this bowl of cereal and I started putting some sugar on my cereal, and she told me I was using too much sugar. You know what I told her, don't you?
What's that?
Get bent. Anyway, she just reached over and grabbed a sugar bowl. I just doubled up my fist and busted her.
Jeez.
Oh, she screamed bloody murder. And but she wasn't done, I'm telling you. She got on that old crank telephone, and my grandfather, when you wanted to call him, you cranked that phone. He was two longs and a short. Ring, ring, ring. So anyway, she got him on the phone, and I didn't realize this at the time, but she was one of his favorites. So anyway, she told him her side of the story, and she was bawling and squalling on the telephone. Finally, she hung up the phone. Boy, she turned around and she said to me, "Grandpa said for you to get down there." Well, they only lived about a quarter of a mile away. So, man, I said, "Oh, I think maybe I've gone too far this time." So anyway, I took my time getting down there. So I can remember walking up to the back door. They were standing, my grandmother and my grandfather both were standing right inside the door waiting on me. I said, "Boy, I'm going to get it." So I opened the screen door, and I said to my grandfather, "Now, Grandpa," and that's all I got out. He handed me a 1-gallon bucket, empty bucket, and said, "Now, Leroy, you take this bucket over there to that berry patch right across the road over there, and you fill this berry bucket up for your mother." And, you know, when he said that, I said, "Man, this is a reprieve." So that's what I did, boy. I didn't waste any time getting to the berry patch, I'll tell you. But, you know, when you're a kid, you can't figure things out. You know, my mother never mentioned that to me, and I know they ratted on me since she came home. And my aunt didn't say anything to me. I know they told her too. My grandfather never mentioned it again. My grandmother never mentioned it again. And I sure didn't mention it again. And my cousin, she forgot all about it. She didn't even remember it anymore. So it was quite an episode. I said, I got away with one that time, I guess.
Instead of physically disciplining you, like beating you or something, he just had you go do something that's physically strenuous, that's also kind of productive.
Yeah.
Everybody.
He was smart. And my guess is he called my mother and my aunt and told them, said, "No, I have taken care of this, so you just butt out." Because he was like that. I'm guessing that's what he did, because nobody ever mentioned it ever again. And, you know, I lived with that same aunt when I got a little older, and she treated me just like one of her kids. I mean, she was really good to me. And in fact, they offered to let me stay down there and go back to school and do all that kind of stuff. You know, I was a teenager, but I didn't want to go back, and it took me a while to get straightened out. So I came back to Anderson when I was 17, I think. Got a job at Dietz's Bakery. Did you know there was a bakery in Anderson? Yeah, it was a local family. Boy, they made great bread. I worked there for a couple of years. And then I decided I had to get out of Anderson. I had to do something. So I went up to the draft board and told them to draft me. And
so would that be drafting, or would that be volunteering technically? If you're
volunteer for the draft, but you got a draftee's number. And back then, if you was a draftee, your serial number started with US. And if you were regular Army, you enlisted, it was RA. If you were National Guard, it was NG.
Okay.
And if it was active reserves, it was AR. So when you went into service, they would ask you all the time. They'd say, "Are you RA?" And I'd say, "No, I'm not. I'm US." And 2 years.
Yeah, then you get treated different.
Yeah. So
what led like before we get too far into the military thing, did you? I mean, we already kind of are seeing that you're a little more independent, more of an independent thinker, kind of strong-willed person. Was there an inspiration or any kind of motivation that led you to the military, or was it just you just wanted to get out of town?
Absolutely. Well, I did want to get out of town, but
or especially, and let me add this to the question: was growing up in the World War II kind of era, did that have a big impact on you?
It had a tremendous. It affected all of us. Those guys were heroes, all of them. You know, those guys would come home, or if they were stationed close by, they'd come into Anderson. They'd get in the movies free. They'd go to a bar. They'd give them free drinks. They'd go into a restaurant. Somebody'd pay for their meal. You see them out on the road hitchhiking. You didn't pass them. You stopped and picked them up. It was a different world. I'm telling you, boy. They were all heroes. So yeah, I had that background. And then of course the movies, recruiting films, and all that. And every time you went to the movies, you saw some of that stuff. And let me tell you something. That war completely took us over, even on the civilian front.
Yeah.
Everything was about the war.
Right.
Even our school books, they talked about the war. It was in the books, in the textbooks. And then we had a little paper that came once a week called a Weekly Reader, and it was it was about the war too. And so we completely consumed by that. And then you couldn't buy anything without ration stamps, or you couldn't go anywhere. You only got 3 gallons of gas a week to drive your car if you had a car. So everything we did was connected to the war, and every day you were just saturated with that. So, and then of course you had these great war films. And then once the World War II was over, I had a cousin that lived in Indianapolis. His name was Wayne Branham. I thought he was wonderful, but he actually was a lot like me. I didn't realize it at the time.
That's probably why you liked him so much.
Maybe so. Anyway, he talked his mother into signing him and say he was 17. So he went into service. He was 15 years old.
Wow.
And he joined the Airborne.
Mm.
I said, I want to be like Wayne. That was his name, Wayne Branham. So those things, that was a combination of things. So when I was 13 years old, I made up my mind that's what I was going to do. I was going to be a paratrooper, and that's all there was to it. And that's exactly what I did, too. And I'll tell you something. All the time I was in there, I never spent 1 second. I never, ever had a split second when I ever thought, I'm not going to jump. I never had that thought. I would never have entertained that kind of thought. But when they said you're jumping, that was just what I did.
Yeah.
So, you know, I saw guys that got pretty nervous and upset, and I got scared. I was afraid. I'm not saying I wasn't. But
controlling that fear.
Yeah.
And just working through it anyways.
We took a ride one time in Fort Benning. We was in the air 2 hours and 45 minutes.
Mm.
And
all rigged up and everything?
Yeah.
That probably wasn't very fun.
No, it wasn't. But I slept part of the time.
Oh, yeah.
But when we got ready to jump, they told us that there was 11,000 spectators down there, civilians. And you know, when you jump, the first thing you do is urinate.
I think about you every time every time that I jump and I do that, I think about you telling me that story before I left for boot camp almost 10 years ago now.
Well, what was funny was when I got on the ground, I said, I don't care what they say. So I urinated, and I looked around, and all the guys were, and there was all those spectators up there. You know, we didn't pay attention to them.
What do they expect you to do after you're in the air for 2.5 hours?
Yeah.
All this tight stuff strapped to you, squeezing your bladder and all this stuff.
And then everything was crazy that day. We had a lot of difficulties that day. A guy streamered right next to me, and he got his chute open before it got to the ground, and he went flying past me, and I had my hands full.
Right.
He went flashing past me, and I didn't want to see him die. And I was twisted, and I had my head down, so I tried to get my head away so I couldn't see him. But he got his chute open before it got to the ground, but I didn't know who it was till the next day. And we were taking practice. We went over to the jump school and practiced before the jump, and that's when I found out who the guy was. So,
did the chute break his fall, or did it not open in enough time?
No, he pulled his reserve, and he told me he came in hard, really hard. But he wasn't the only one. those parachutes, they got wet in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, they told us, before they brought them down to us in Fort Benning. And when we jumped, it was hotter than blazes. And when that hot air and the friction in the air hit those parachutes, just blew them all to pieces. I told you I had some trouble. I had a whole panel missing, and I had 3 holes about the size of a helmet.
Yeah, they would just tell you to pull your reserve immediately.
Yeah.
Nowadays.
But the thing was, I looked around. I couldn't see where I was falling any faster than anybody else was. So I said, I'm riding this thing in. So that's what I did. And I was glad I did, too, because, man, I didn't want to pull that reserve. You know what they do to you if you pull a reserve?
I just experienced it. I didn't pull my reserve, but I was just 2 weeks ago we were out doing a jump, and I was one of the only guys that wasn't on it because I had they had some new guys that hadn't jumped outside of airborne school yet, and they wanted them to jump. They prioritized them, and since it was me and one other guy had the most jumps out of our chalk, so they took him and I off and put new guys in our positions. But one of those new guys pulled his reserve, and pulling your reserve is a very subjective thing.
Sure is.
So to criticize somebody from the ground and yell at them for for pulling their reserve when they didn't need to, I'm kind of torn on it because it's his 6th jump ever. So I'm sure he's scared, and he doesn't have enough experience yet to know if he has a few twists. Well, you can work those out, and you don't have to pull your reserve. Or I don't know what his reasoning was, but I saw him get reamed out for pulling his reserve because the guys on the ground said you didn't need to. What'd you pull it for?
Yeah.
Now we got to do this whole inspection, this whole investigation.
Yeah.
And so they were not happy with that guy, but I kind of felt bad for him. Especially, you don't want to tell a young guy who's inexperienced. You don't want to punish him for pulling his reserve, and then the next time that he needs to, he doesn't because he doesn't want to get yelled at or something. Yeah. But, it's not a good thing when you pull your reserve. You don't ever want to be that guy. You don't want to pull it and be wrong.
They run you down.
You don't want to not pull it and be right.
They run you down out there. They don't wait till you get up to the trucks.
Yeah, they sent 2 guys sprinting down to him because they have to take your reserve from you. They don't want you to cut holes in your stuff or something to justify pulling it. So, yeah, they have to do a thorough investigation of everything immediately. And they don't want the extra work, so then they're mad.
Yeah.
But what was airborne school like for you back in that day? Because seeing these movies like Band of Brothers and stuff, and being in airborne school, and they're showing us these documentaries about airborne school and the history of it, it seems like back in that day to be in the paratroopers, that was the most elite unit that there was in the Army at the time.
Well, they had commandos, and they had, they did have, when I was in the service, they had Green Berets.
Oh, they were still brand new, though, weren't they, in that day?
They were new. It was a very small unit. Wasn't very big at all. But, we did that 5 days a week. You got up, you had breakfast, in your company area, and then they would march you over to the school, and then when you got there, they had roll call. You know how roll call is, don't you? They call your name, and then when you get done calling the roll, first thing they say is "quitters out front." And so, we had some guys that quit. And I'll tell you the truth, there was times when I thought, man, I ought to quit.
Was it that hard back then? Was it really challenging?
It was tough. I said, I'm not quitting.
Yeah, it's not that challenging nowadays. I feel like it's gotten easier over time because I was like, back being that age, I was not in the physical shape that I am now. And I never thought it was really that hard at all. I thought the running was kind of annoying, but it was like as long as you're somewhat coordinated with your body and you can do the proper jumping and the proper parachute landing falls, and there's no reason to
That's all you
fail.
did?
Yeah, we didn't. There's not any excessive PT or anything like that. We just ran a lot.
Well, see, we had 3 weeks of what they call P-back, and all it was physical training.
Wow.
They took you over to the jump school, and, man, you did physical things all day. Judo classes and, that's what I called them, hand-to-hand combat stuff, and running, of course. And they took you to the movie theater and showed you these training films And the outfit I was in, a lot of us guys came from Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and we were really lucky because they really put the physical stuff on us down there in Fort Leonard Wood. And so by the time we got to Fort Bragg, we were in good shape.
Yeah, which, by the way, before, not to glaze over that fact, is that you went to airborne school at Fort Bragg,
Yeah.
not at Fort Benning.
Yeah.
I'm going to have a few airborne buddies watching this, and they're going to be like, what? And then also something I was thinking about was what Dad told me to ask you this was what chute you jumped back then?
Oh, we jumped T-10s.
T-10s?
Yeah.
But was that, did they even have a T-10 Bravo or anything, or was it just a T-10?
No, in fact, we were told, they told us that they'd been jumping T-7s and they had just switched over. Do you know what a T-7 was like?
No.
Well, when they opened, they popped you. I mean, they popped open. And when they did, these guys, I talked to them. I know they said they had blood blisters on their chests, and or that when they chutes would pop open, and their helmets. You know what their helmets were like? I mean, they didn't have helmets like we had, steel pots and stuff. The helmets before we went in there were just leather. I mean, it wasn't that. And I talked to those guys. I know what. One of them was a colonel, and when I got out of the service, I got to know him pretty well. And he asked me these same questions, and he said, did you jump those T-7s? And I said, oh, no, I didn't jump the T-7s. He said, you know what we called you? And I said, no, what did they call us? And he said, they called you guys the Tender Tens. So, you know, he was kind of proud of the fact that they had to take all that punishment, but I wasn't. I was glad I didn't have to do that, I'll tell you that.
So they had just phased those T-7s out and just gone to T-10s?
And of course, when we went to that PM shed too, and they showed us how to pack chutes, you know, but it was just strictly to familiarize us.
Yeah, we don't pack chutes.
So
we don't go through any kind of class.
We went down there and they familiarized us in that school, and then one day, and it was over with. And so we didn't have to pack our own chutes. And, you know, there's a lot of different experiences that you had in there, but that wasn't one of them. I was glad we didn't have to do that, I'll be honest with you. But the T-7s, I was told, you could just throw them together and they'd open. But you couldn't do that with a T-10. You had to pack them the way they were supposed to be packed.
Right.
And another thing was, I have to admit, I was a little bit superstitious when I was in there. They had these cotton webbing gear on the T-10 chutes, and they had just started making them using nylon. And those nylon would kind of double over and bite into you. I hated them. I loved those cotton. They were the old ones, you know.
Yeah.
But guys that I jumped with, they found out that I didn't like those nylon chutes and webbing anyway. So they would say to me, well, you want to swap? I said, here, I'll swap you. I got one of those cotton ones. I said, I'm not swapping with anybody. I'm taking what they give me. That thing's liable to streamer. And they'd say, well, the one you got's liable to streamer. And I said, I'll take my chances. This is what they gave me. That's what I'm jumping.
Yeah.
I didn't like them, though. I didn't like them worth a hoot. I loved those cotton webbing. So.
Yeah, it's just fascinating to hear that they had just phased out the T-7s and that you're jumping these new T-10s. And then when I came in 2013, we were jumping T-10 Deltas. So, you know, they had gone through 3 other models since your parachute.
Oh, yeah.
And they were phasing the T-10 Deltas out. So I think I have 2 or 3 T-10 Delta jumps in airborne school. And then they had us jump the new chutes, the T-11s, which are totally different. And I honestly I prefer the T-10 Deltas to the T-11s. The T-10 Deltas are lighter and smaller, and just the chute in general is smaller, but it doesn't carry as big of a weight capacity. So like we were talking about earlier, you know, we're carrying more gear than ever now. They had to develop a bigger chute to carry all that gear. So the T-11 is a big chute, but it's a square. It's a box chute.
Yeah, your dad showed me that.
Yeah, so the T-10 Deltas were circular, but these T-11s, they're so big that you can't hardly steer them at all.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're about to collide with somebody, you can pull your slip for 10, 15 seconds and not move at all.
Yeah, I know.
And so luckily I'm in this new, well, it used to be a Lurch unit now, and we've jumped these MC6 parachutes. and they're not the rectangular like civilian parachutes. They look like T-10s. They're circular, but they have these vents on the back of them that open and close when you pull, and they're not slips, they're toggles. So they're actually really steerable, and it's like as soon as you pull that toggle, you start maneuvering, and they're nice. You can actually steer yourself really close to the chute turn in, so you don't have to walk that far, and then right at the last minute turn into the wind and have a real nice soft landing. Those are my favorite chutes of all time now. But yeah, sorry to go off on that tangent, but
no, that's all right. I'd like to hear that.
It's cool to hear the difference in the chutes.
When I see these guys jumping on film, I always look at the parachutes. I look at their harnesses. When they get on the ground, I can tell they're different.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I knew the chutes were a lot different than what we jumped.
Yeah, but it was funny getting the T-10 Deltas. I remember they were all this green, and the material just looked old, even though they're still a modern chute at that time, just now getting phased out. And then these T-11s are all gray, nice, shiny, new looking stuff.
So the reserves, were they all green?
Yeah, the reserves back then were all green. They were kind of long and rectangular, and had that side handle metal bar was the actual release handle to actually deploy the reserve. And then now we have these big square, they're about this big, and they're just big and square. It looks like a big pillow with the big red handle on the front of it. But now you have all these new kids that there's a handle on top of it that goes right here, and then there's the red handle on the front that actually pops the reserve. So what you see all the time now is they'll take the reserve off as they're de-rigging after they land, and then they'll go to grab the reserve and just grab the red handle to pick it up, and they end up popping the reserve on the ground.
Oh, boy.
And those guys get in a lot of trouble.
I bet they do.
Because they have no reason. They just grabbed the wrong handle. And then they're like, we made it red. We made it red so you know not to grab it. But they still do it all the time.
Our reserves were the same parachutes that the guys in World War II used
as their primaries?
As their primary chute, the guys that were in the Air Force. The guys that flew those bombers,
yeah,
those chutes that are on the front of them, there's the same chutes that we used as reserves.
Well, that's interesting.
No, our guns were all from World War II. Most of our equipment was still from World War II.
Right.
In fact, some of them were from World War I. The machine guns, the M1A1 light machine guns. Of course, the 50 caliber machine guns came out while World War I was going on, but they never got into the hands of the troops, and so they didn't get to use them until World War II. But we were still using that's our equipment. They had all that stuff left over. They had to do something with it.
Was that the M2? The M2 50 caliber machine gun?
I can't remember if it was the nomenclature.
I want to say it's the same one that we use today.
Is it?
Yeah, they've made some modern, advancements to it, but
that was a super weapon. I'm telling you.
Still, I want to say it's the same exact one that we use now.
See, I was in what they used to have, what they called heavy weapons companies, and we had 81 mortars and 50 caliber machine guns and 106 recoilless rifles. I think that was it. Once in a while, we had to train on 4.2 mortars too. So we had that's the kind of training we had. We had 8 weeks of basic in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, before we ever went to jump school. So we took 8 weeks of basic training in Fort Leonard Wood, and then we took another 8 weeks in Fort Bragg, and then we went to that PBAC, which was 3 weeks of physical training, and then we took jump school. I can't remember. Jump school only lasted 2 or 3 weeks, didn't it?
Yeah, it's 3 weeks now.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, that's what I was curious about, because it seemed like back then, being in the paratroopers was like, that's an elite thing. Not a lot of people make it through that back in your era, but nowadays it's like, if you are even mildly in decent shape, you can pass airborne school. And there's not all those prerequisites either.
You had to be in good physical shape. I saw guys get flunked because they couldn't do enough chin-ups.
Yeah, it's just not even a thing anymore. It's more just an easy school. It's got a nice chow hall. You got a pretty nice barracks to sleep in. You just go and learn how to jump out of planes every day for 3 weeks, and it was really kind of a vacation, especially after basic training. Getting done with basic training and going to airborne school is like, oh, this is great. This is
really,
yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah. I'm sorry if that disappoints you.
No, it's just interesting.
Yeah. Well, what was it like being in the Army that few years after World War II had ended? Because there had to still be a lot of guys that were in World War II
absolutely.
that were still in.
Come the commander that lived next door to us in Germany. He was Congressional Medal of Honor winner.
Wow.
He'd been in the South Pacific, fought the Japanese, and the story was, and I believed it too, he was a super person. He was a captain, but he wore that medal all the time. But he carried it on a chain. He carried it on a chain and flipped it around all the time. But he was really something, boy. But he was different. But the guys loved working for him. He was a company commander. I told you I got married when I was in jump school, didn't I?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was an episode too, because nobody gets out of jump school, but I did. I got 5-day leave.
Wow.
In jump school. So when I come back, now when you're young and you have these first got married, and what married life is like when you first get married. And I mean, when I came back, I was pretty well spent, to be honest with you. So when I got back to jump school, all the cadre in jump school, they knew me. My number was 12. Everyone all the cadre knew number 12. And they would surround me, and man, they would play the craziest jokes on me you can imagine, harass me all the time. And at the same time, they were helping me. It sounds funny, but that's the way it was. They were helping me. They wanted to make sure I made it through school. But
might not always seem that way in the moment, but
but it was hotter than blazes in Fort Bragg when we was going through jump school. It was in August.
It gets into the hundreds there.
Once an hour, they'd stop what you were doing and then make you go over and drink all the water you could hold. So that's what we were doing. Well, I tell you, we were in this mock-up, teaching how to exit the plane, just an old wooden mock-up. And I didn't realize, I was soaking wet. I looked like I'd been in a shower. I was soaked all the way through from sweating, and I was shaking all over. I was too stupid to know what was going on. I was getting a heat stroke. And so I was sitting in a mock-up, and I heard this guy say, "Davis." I said, "Did he say Davis?" So I just sat there. Oh, man, this corporal got on that mock-up. He got a hold of me, unhooked me from that, jerked me out of that, and threw me out of that mock-up. And when I got on the ground, there was this sergeant waiting on me down there. And this sergeant said to me, "Come over here and sit down in the shade." And so I said, "What are you going to do?" So I went over there and I sat down, and he said, "How you feeling?" I said, "This sergeant's treating me like I'm real." And so, "I'm okay, Sergeant." He said, "You go over there and you get yourself a good, healthy drink, and you come right back over here and sit in the shade with me for a few minutes."
Is that what Aunt Sandra was talking about earlier?
I don't know.
She's talking about sitting under a tree.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. I came back over, and I sat over there with him probably for better than a half an hour, maybe an hour, trying to get everything back together again. And they took it easy on me the rest of the day. But to tell you the truth, I was so dumb, I didn't know they were doing it. I'm just a dumb kid. I was 18 years old, but I tell you what, I didn't know anything. And I would run into those guys, those cadre, when we'd be out in the boondocks somewhere, and they treated me like I was royalty. You thought I was really something special. When I made my first jump, no, it wasn't the first jump, the third jump I made, I was the first guy out the door. And I was out in the air, and the chute was deployed, and I heard this guy talking on the ground. He said, "Well, you're coming in, you're going to come in on your left side, PLF. You're looking good, get your feet together, get your eyes on the horizon." I thought, well, he's not talking to me, but he was. Some captain down there talking to me, the head of the jump school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I didn't know it till I got on the ground who it was. But anyway, when I got on the ground, he talked to me, said, "Well, you did okay." And the next jump I made, I was the first guy out the door that time too. And I'm telling you, if you got to jump, being the first guy out the door was the greatest thing in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah, I've only done it one time now.
Yeah.
And it was actually just last summer or last fall. So I've got close to 30 jumps now.
Wow.
And it took me that many jumps to get my first one being the number one jumper, but it was great.
Yeah.
Because it's like there's a lot of for people who might be listening that don't know, there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong being in the middle of a stack. You could be a little too close to the person in front of you. The person behind you can be a little too close to you, doing what's called riding your pack tray. It can interfere with your chute opening, or their static line could get wrapped in your stuff. There's so many things that could go wrong. But when you're number one jumper, you're in the door, and everybody else is about 2 feet away from you, and it's almost like a private experience. And you jump out, and you're way far away from everybody.
Yeah,
it's like luxury in that situation.
You know, they didn't jump like we jumped in Fort Bragg in 11th Airborne. They didn't jump anything like we did.
So when you, like, what period were you in the 82nd, and then what period did you go to Germany in the 11th?
Well, I made 7 jumps when I was in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. 2 of them I made in Fort Benning, Georgia. But I was still in the 82nd. And then I graduated from jump school early in September. And in December, I got orders to go to Germany. They transferred me over to the 11th Airborne.
So that time that you were in jump school and stuff, were you technically in the 82nd at that point?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, nowadays most often you go to airborne school first and you're unassigned. So you don't have a patch on your left shoulder. You're there without a unit. And then once you go through airborne school, then they send you to an airborne unit. And so
no. We took what they called airborne basic for 8 weeks.
Right.
And part of the training, you took your regular training, basic training, but part of that training was teaching you basic things like how to jump out of an airplane and stuff like that. Some of the really basic things, like telling you to recover, and if you say uncover or something, you're in trouble. You know that, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Stand in the chow line, and gnats were eating you alive, and you couldn't swat them. They wouldn't let you swat them. So gnats are hungry too. So you couldn't do anything about that. But I'm telling you, the 11th Airborne was a lot different.
So you're in the 82nd there. Was that about your first year?
Yeah.
And then you went to the 11th for your second year?
Yeah, I spent about a little over probably 10 months in the 11th Airborne in Germany. But over there, all you got was pay jumps. You got every 3 months you got to jump just for pay, because the weather is different over there. You get that air coming off of the Atlantic Ocean and sweeps across the continent up there, and it's just totally different than it is here. So you're lucky to even get pay jumps. And sometimes you don't get that. Sometimes they send you out there and you sit out there all day waiting for a plane. And you have to take your chutes off and put them, and go back and try again some other day.
Yeah.
And then when you jump, the drop zones were crazy. I jumped on a drop zone one time where it had holes in it, looked like shell holes from artillery, boulders as big as cars, trees. Fortunately, they were all that stuff was on the edge. I thought I was going to come right down in the middle of them, but I didn't. I missed it. I came out on the edge of the drop zone. But what was crazy about it was, which I didn't know to start with, was when I made my first jump, I was in the middle of the pack. I was like number 10 or some crazy thing. And so when we got ready to unload, well, they started going out the door, and man, they were just going, and there was no pause. And when you get back to the barracks, back to the guys that had their faces all burned up, the parachutes jumping into each other, and broken limbs, craziest stuff you ever saw, scared the heck out of me. Because in Fort Bragg, they had these huge drop zones. Right. We had plenty of time, and we took our time jumping. Well, I told the guys in the barracks, which was a mistake. I said, "You guys are crazy. You're jumping like that." And then, of course, they all said, "You guys and pussies from 82nd. I said, "I'll tell you this much. You're not ever going to do that to me again. You're never going to rush me out the door like that again." And so that was the big joke. It went around all over the company area for a while. So when we made the next jump, I was still thinking about that. So when we got in the plane, I was in the middle of the stick again. And so when they started moving, when it got my turn, instead of putting my hands on the outside of the door, I put them on the inside, and I just stopped. And the guy behind me was so startled. And then I reached around, grabbed the door, and jerked myself out the door. And by the time he recovered, I was gone. So when we got back to the barracks, Everybody was told that I froze in the door.
Oh, come on.
I said, didn't I tell you? And I said, I tell you, I'm going to do it again too. You're not pushing me out that door you're not jumping into me, and I'm not jumping into somebody else. And I never did jump. I mean, those guys were nuts. I said, what do you do that for? Why? Well, I found out. They said in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, where they took their training, which they were there before the 101st was there, see? Where they took their training, the drop zones were short, and if you didn't get out the door in time, there was a good chance that you might land on a road, or you might land in the woods, or you didn't know where you were going to land, so they were always in a hurry. But it was dangerous, I'm telling you, it was dangerous.
Did you ever get hurt on any of those jumps?
No, I didn't. I saw a lot of crazy things, though. I made a jump one time, and there was a guy that had just been killed, a paratrooper, had died just a few days before we jumped. He landed on one of those electric railroads on that center track and electrocuted him. So when we jumped, everybody was thinking about that, you know. And I got out, and I couldn't even see the drop zone. I mean, we were so far off, and I was looking for it. All this time we're coming down, you know, and there's this huge high-tension place fenced off out there where the high-tension lines was running out of there. I saw a guy almost go into there. I saw a guy almost land on a disc that they used to disc up the part of the ground around there. He just barely missed it. A friend of mine landed in a sheepskin out there, a sheep pen, and the sheep panicked and jumped on the fence, and the fence collapsed, and the paratroopers were in the air, paratroopers were on the ground. They were everywhere, and those sheep were just going everywhere. And when he got back to the truck, he had sheep shit all over him. You know, they had a big laugh about that too, but they did some crazy things. Yeah, crazy stuff. And then people would say to me, do you ever have anything scary happen to you out there? I said, something scary happened every time. What are you talking about? Sometimes it was a lot better than it was other times, but.
What was it like to be in Germany 10 years after the war was over? Well, that had to be
the barracks we lived in. It had been an officer's barracks for the German army, and but it was an infantry outfit. But anyway, the buildings were all a lot like they are now in the modern barracks for our own services. They were really nice, to tell you the truth. But one of them had been bombed, and they blew off one corner of the building, and so where we lived on the last room on the end of the hallway. But there should have been another room, but it was blown off. So what they did, they just sealed it off. And so in order for those guys to get into their room, they had to come through our room and then go into their room. And believe it or not, they'd shut off the heat at night. And in Germany, it was cold.
Yeah.
I've seen ice 2 or 3 inches thick on the walls in there. I'm not kidding. They turned the heat on. I don't know why they did that. I talked to guys that lived in the barracks all around us, and they didn't do that to any of them. They had heat all night. We didn't have heat. I don't know what the deal was.
Wow. Well, what was the climate like as far as like how the American soldiers treated the Germans, and how were the Germans, like what was and how they treated the Americans there? Like had there been enough time passed where there was not so much tension, or was there still kind of a tension in the air between two?
There was still tension. You know, when I was mustering out of Germany, I was getting ready to come back to the States. They housed us with German paratroopers. But
Fallschirmjäger.
Yeah, Fallschirmjägers. Fallschirmjägers, we call them. Anyway, they lived in one half of the barracks, and we lived in the other half. And we were told not to fraternize with them. So they said, we're going to share the latrines. So in the morning when you get up to shave, you're going to be in there with those guys. It's okay to say, good morning, you know, you okay, and something like that. But let it go at that. Do not fraternize with these German paratroopers, and they are not to fraternize with you. So that was kind of the setup there. When we went to town, if you were smart, I didn't go to town a lot. But when I went, I always went in uniform, and we were told there were certain sections in town to, you know, kind of be careful about. And so we stayed in our own places, and we frequented the same bars and the same restaurants and stuff. And so we knew where to go. But I had a friend who was a German. I was in a basic training with him, went through jump school with him, and he invited me to go to town with him one time. And I said, what do you want to do? And he said, well, let's go in and have a nice meal, or on the weekend. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. He said, well, not. And I said, all I got is uniforms, and those Germans don't like us in the nicer parts of town. The truth of the matter is, I didn't blame them. Those guys are animals when they went over there. The Germans hated them for good reason, to tell you the truth. That's the way I saw it. He said, no, he said, that's not going to happen. He said, I'll tell you what, of course, he was German, he spoke German. He was an American citizen by then, but he said, we'll just go in, we'll order a meal, we'll have our meal, we'll get up and leave, and you won't have any trouble. Nobody will bother you. He said, they might look at you, and that's exactly what they did. Everybody stared at us when we went in because I was in uniform. But but those guys did silly things over there.
Of course. That's what the Army does wherever they go. They go do
when we got there,
trouble.
The 11th Airborne had already gone over before. We went in as fillers. And by the time we got there, they had bed check at midnight. They didn't have that to start with. They had bed check. Passes were restricted. It was almost impossible to get a 3-day pass. The first day that I was there, when I went in this company area, we knew some of the guys that had gone previously from the 82nd over there, and so they said they'd show us where the mess hall was. And we started to go down the mess hall, and on the way down there was a bunch of prisoners going down there. They had shotguns and rifles on them, and taking them to the mess hall. And I said, "What the heck's that?" And the guy said, "Oh, that's those stupid guys." I said, they went to town, and they're all from the South, and there was some German girls in there, and they were dating these black guys in this bar. Guys didn't like it, so they threw some hand grenades in there. And so now they're facing a court-martial. And that's the kind of crazy stuff they did. When I first got there, you couldn't get alcohol in anything but a paper cup because the guys were nuts. They just tore everything up, got in trouble all the time. They had muster roll calls and telling you how many guys got court-martialed this week and all. It was crazy. The commanding general got relieved. That's when we got Stilwell over there. Boy, he was good working for, I'm telling you. But so in a way, I don't blame them. They finally eased off, and we started getting champagne and beer in real bottles. And of course, we drank most of it out of mugs anyway because we like draft beer. But they had some great beer.
How typical, and like as much as things have changed in the Army technology-wise, it seems like you always still have some things that stay consistent, and like guys going someplace and getting in trouble and making the locals not like anybody and ruining it for the guys coming in, and that never changes. That's always happening no matter where we go. You're always going to have the rule breakers go get in trouble.
We had one guy, he was in trouble all the time, and he talked 4 other guys into going with him, and they went out and took a Jeep from the motor pool, went out and got drunk in town, got picked up by the MPs, and then they came back and they were facing a court-martial. And they would have been court-martialed if it hadn't been for our, the first sergeant and the platoon sergeant that we had. They saved their bacon for them because they were nice kids, and they were all just kids. Yeah. The Airborne's full of guys from 17 to 20 years old. That's what they're full of. So they're trying to grow up. Want to act tough. I never thought I was tough, so I didn't have to worry about that.
Sorry, go ahead.
I did get an education on how to drink German beer and German alcohol, and it didn't take me very long to catch on that it was a lot stronger than anything I'd ever been used to.
Well, so I posted online a few days ago that I was gonna sit down with you and talk. And I had one buddy that wanted me to ask you about knowing that you're kind of more of a free thinker and you don't really conform to the way that the military thinks all the time. What were your opinions on the grooming standards? And some context for you was nowadays they're looking at not necessarily totally doing away with grooming standards, but letting guys in the Army grow beards and stuff. What's your thoughts on something like that happening?
Oh, I was proud when I was in the 82nd. because you wore spit-shine boots and you wore clean clothes every day. You put on clean underwear. You kept your hair cut. You get a haircut once a week.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was really proud of the way they did. I got to the 11th Airborne, and they never spit-shined their boots over there. And they'd wear their fatigues sometimes 2 or 3 days before they changed. They didn't have to wash their belts and shine their brass every day. It was really different. But I just kept right on doing what I was trained to do because I liked it.
So you were proud of that clean cut,
professional
appearance.
I loved it, boy. I did. That part of it I really liked.
I guess I fall into the category of those free thinkers that think at this point, because the special operations guys grow beards, and a lot of that's cultural. Being in the Middle East, that culture over there, the village elders don't respect you if you don't have a beard. That's like the sign of being a man, and they're not going to respect you if you look like a boy, and they're not going to respect women. So the way that they know that you're a man is by having a beard. So a lot of the special forces guys grow beards so that they have an easier time blending with the culture over there.
Sure, I understand that.
But there's a big push right now for maybe not a full raggly, somebody from the hills kind of beard, but at least some kind of something, trying to make it look as professional as possible. But I like that you just laugh about it. You're not into it at all.
Well, see, I only shaved once a week when I was in. I shaved every Thursday so I could pass inspection on Saturday. Yeah, I didn't.
But you shaved on Thursday to pass inspection on Saturday.
Yes. I didn't have a beard. So yeah, it wasn't much of a problem for me. I got stopped in the field one time. There was 2 Davises in my company, and we were out in the boondocks, and we had this company commander. Boy, he was tough. And he came up to us after we'd been out there about a week, and I was talking to this kid. His name was Richard Davis, and he comes up between us. This company commander comes up between us and said, "Davis, didn't I tell you to shave every day when you were in the field?" And before I could say anything, because I hadn't shaved the whole time we'd been out there, and before I could say anything, old Richard said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "The next time I see you, you better be shaved." And he turned around and walked off. And I said, "How wonderful." He never said a word to me. Of course, he didn't know I hadn't shaved for a week. So
it's funny that you say that in the 82nd you got a haircut every week and all that. And I remember every Monday, because we had to get a haircut every weekend. Saturday or Sunday, you just had to come in Monday and you had to have a fresh haircut. And I remember my squad leader would go up and down behind everybody and feel the back of your neck to see if it was like, that fresh, like a sandpaper feel. And if you didn't have that, if you had a little bit of this stuff growing on the back of your neck, he would just destroy you. And especially the face, he'd want to kind of feel the same thing on your face, know that you shaved that day. And if you had a little bit of a shadow coming in by noon, then you're getting destroyed too. So it's just funny how some of those traditions are still there. But so you did 2 years on active duty, and then what kind of led to you deciding to get out, or at least go to the reserves, as you said you went to the reserves?
Well, I stayed out for about a year after I got out.
Okay.
I'm going to be honest with you. When I got out of the service, the day that I left the service, I got my discharge papers in Fort Sheridan, Illinois. Well, I got separation papers. They didn't discharge you. And so I was still in the active reserves, or the inactive reserves. But the day I got my papers and went to catch an airplane back to Indianapolis, I was the happiest person in the whole world. I was really ready to get out of the service. I did not like being in the service. And it was all about that regimentation. Mm-hmm. I just didn't like it. Because somebody was always messing with you, and telling you when you could take a crap and when
right.
Well,
I mean, going back to even what you said about your childhood, where you said all you kids were a little bit more independent.
Yeah.
Maybe that was like more common with the times.
It was.
But I mean, you're working as a kid. You have a job. You're getting up early. You already have all these responsibilities that a lot of people nowadays in their late teens, early 20s don't have. But I mean, I feel like you're already kind of developed as a person, and then you go into this thing where they're telling you that you don't know anything and you had to do everything the way that they want you to do. I could see why you'd have a hard time totally buying into it. And
at the same time, though, here's a kind of a curious thing for me is I really respected guys with rank. And when I talked to a corporal, I called him corporal. And when I talked to a sergeant, I called him sergeant. And I talked to an officer, I called him sir. And I did that consistently. I never ever said yes or no and left that out. Never. I believed in that. And I made some really good friends. I met a guy at the bus stop. He'd catch a bus at 3 o'clock in the morning when we was in Fort Bragg. I'd leave in Fayetteville to go into camp. And he caught the same bus I did. And so I had a few minutes. I'd talk to him out there on the curb while we were waiting on the bus. And he was a sergeant first class. And so, you know, I really liked the guy, and I always called him sergeant. I never really paid very much attention. The guy was black. And boy, it was different when you were black back then, I'm telling you. It was different.
I bet.
But I treated him just like I did any other sergeant. Some of the best non-commissioned officers I knew were black. I mean, some of them were really good, and he was one of them. And I didn't realize this at the time, but it really paid off later on, because when we were out in the boondocks in Fort Bragg, I got in trouble with the platoon sergeant. So he says to me, "You get yourself down to the mess hall and tell the mess sergeant down there you're on KP." And so I, okay, Sarge. So I headed out down to the mess hall. And when I got down there, this guy was the mess sergeant. And I come in the tent and he said, "Davis, what are you doing here?" And so I told him, "Well, Sarge, the platoon sergeant sent me down here. I got in trouble." He said, "I was on KP." He said, "You like cake?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Go sit down over there. You want some coffee?" I said, "Yes." He brought me some coffee. He waited on me. He got me some cake and coffee, and we sat in there and shot the bull. Pretty soon he said to me, "Davis, you're going to have to go back to your company." And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Now I'm going to tell you something. This is just for you, but you're going to get gassed." And he said, "Word has come down." He said, "They're going to take you out away from the camp here in a secluded area out there, and they're going to gas you." And I said, "Oh, man, thanks for telling me, Sarge." So I was clear at the back of the column when we were going down the road. Well, I'd been gassed before, you know. And I thought they was going to come running down the road between us, between the columns, with gassing us out of the back of a truck or something. So I was looking for that. And so I was constantly looking over my shoulder. But the thing I didn't realize was that they had no intention of using a truck. I had my head turned part way around looking for that truck, and I saw something out of the corner of my eye. Here come this single-engine plane. Boy, he was right on top of us. I mean, on top of us. And he cut that gas loose. But he gave me just enough time that I got my gas mask on with that. Because I saw him just that few seconds. You know, you learn to be pretty fast with that.
Yeah.
And I yelled gas and put my mask on. And he hit us with that stuff, and he was so low it was still liquid. He sent everybody to the infirmary.
Jeez.
He sent the whole company to the infirmary. One of the guys went crazy and ran off in the woods. And one guy got down on the ground and was rubbing his face in the dirt. It was crazy, I'm telling you. And you know, the Army, they just totally ignored that.
Yeah.
We had a place where we could bathe. It was dammed off. It was a creek down there. And we just went down there and clothes and all, and washed off in that down there. And most of us, they treated a lot of guys, but I never got burned that bad because I was at the end of the column. But the guys in the middle, boy, but they sent everybody to the infirmary, but I didn't really get burned that bad.
Well,
but that gas, tear gas will burn you. It'll burn you up. I saw guys with blisters that big.
Jeez.
I mean, it really ate them up.
Yeah, everybody has to go through a gas chamber now in your basic training.
Yeah.
So you can learn the mask and everything like that. But I think it's just like mustard gas, just CS gas or something like that.
Yeah,
so
we did that too.
You lose all control of the fluids in your face. You're all snotty and maybe throwing up a little bit, and crying and stuff. But it wasn't anything that was going to burn your skin and stuff. That's another level.
When I got out of the service, I'd been out about a year, and I decided I want to go into reserves. So, believe it or not, I went to a chemical, biological, and radiological warfare unit. And it was interesting. It was interesting. I was still a PFC. They made me a corporal right away.
That's a good deal.
Yeah. The first sergeant, he really liked me. the first year I was in there, we went to Fort McClellan, Alabama for a 2-week training course down there, summer time. And like I said, I got to be friends with the first sergeant. Well, he was a womanizer. So we were out drinking beer, and it was all together, 4 or 5 of us. And he caught the eye of this blonde. Fort McClellan, Alabama was a training center for wax. So he caught this girl's eye. And so he left us and went out calabooting, or whatever you want to call it. Anyway, the next morning he came up to me and he said, "Davis, I got a job for you." I said, "Well, what is it?" And he said, "I got this lipstick all over my shirt." And he said, "Can you get this out?" And I said, "Sure, I can get it out." And so it took a lot of work, but I did get it out. He said, "If I take this shirt home, my wife will kill me."
Oh, my God.
I said, "Why don't you just throw it away?" And he said, No, that wouldn't work. So anyway, I cleaned it up for him. And boy, from then on, we were Ace Boons and Almond Joys. I mean, yeah. I stayed in almost 2 years, I think, in there. And they told us it was going to send us down to, I think it was Grayling in Michigan, up in Michigan, on deuce and a halfs. I said, "I'm not riding no deuce and a half all the way to Michigan." And so the next meeting we went to, he came up to me and said, "Hey, I got good news for you. You don't have to go." And I told him I wanted out. And he said, "You don't have to leave. You don't have to ride in a deuce and a half." He said, "We'll put you on a bus." I said, "Stanley, I don't want to ride on a bus up to Fort Grayling either." So I said, "Just get my papers ready." And so then the next time we met, he said, "I got some good news for you this time for sure." He said, "You can drive your own car and we'll pay you mileage per diem, if you just stay in." And he said, on top of that, he said, "I'll make you a sergeant." I said, "Get my papers ready. I'm not going to play Army anymore. This place is getting too chicken." So he did. He got my papers ready, but I could have been a sergeant.
Well, so how old were you when you got out of the reserves?
Well, I had a 6-year obligation, so I was 20 when I got out. I'd have been 26.
Okay. But you could just get out.
Anytime you wanted to.
Yeah.
That all changed, though,
Yeah.
A couple of years after I got out, it was mandatory. You had to stay in the reserves a certain length, what they call the active reserves.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. I might have made a mistake getting out, but like you said, I was an independent thinker.
Yeah. So then what you mentioned earlier that you went to college and all that. How soon after you got off the reserves did you go to college? Or were you going to college while you were in the reserves?
No. I tell you, I was kind of a screwball. I did a lot of crazy stuff when I was young. I'm not kidding. I got in trouble for it too. But when I was 23 years old, that's when I got saved. And when I did, God started talking to me. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about or not. Yeah. But anyway, that was in 1960. And then all at once, in 1965, I could hear him saying to me, "Get yourself ready, you're going to college. You're too done to live." I'm not kidding. And I said, "Oh, this is crazy." I quit school. I haven't been in school for 13 years. I hated school when I was in there. I made up my mind once in the 5th grade I was going to quit school, and I did it. And I can't go to college. I'd never make it. Boy, he wouldn't quit. He just kept talking to me. He said, "You get yourself ready, you're going to college." That went on for months. And so finally I had this friend. He was a good Christian friend of mine. He's about 20 years older than me, and I told him about it. I said, I guess I'm going to have to go to college. I'm absolutely convinced he's talking to me and telling me to go to college. And it didn't make any sense. And I said, "I don't have any money. How am I going to go to college?" We didn't have the GI Bill. I said, "How am I going to go to college?" He didn't say anything. He just said, "Well, if that's what he's telling you to do, that's what you better do." So I went to Marion, Indiana, what's called Wesleyan College up there now, but it was called Marion College back then. And I enrolled, no money. And so and believe it or not, this friend of mine, when I found out how much the fee was, believe it or not, you could go to college. My first payment that was due up there for a whole semester up there was $325. You'd like to go to school for $325 a semester now?
Yeah.
And so I came back, and I was just talking to this friend of mine. I said, yeah, I don't know where I'm going to get the money. I guess it'll show up someplace. So he just handed me $325. And so that's how I got started. I went to school up there for 3 years, and then I got the GI Bill. See, the Vietnam War started in 1965. They went back and picked up all those guys that had lost the GI Bill previously. And so I got enough money in the GI Bill to pay all my tuition and some of my books, but I had to make up the difference. And I was working at Ramey's by then, and for General Motors, and so I started going to school at Anderson College. And so I went to school out there from 1968 to 1974, half-time. I just carried a half a schedule. And then I graduated from there. I had a teacher's license. But back in those days, if you wanted to keep your teacher's license, you had to pick up so many hours over a 5-year period just to retain your license. So when it got close to time for me I knew I was going to have to get those hours, I went over and enrolled in Ball State because they didn't have a master's program out here. So I enrolled in Ball State to take those extra hours. And so because I was a history nut anyway, I just took advantage of it and took some classes over there and held on to my license. And I did that a couple of times. So altogether, now I didn't go full time, but altogether, I went to school about 15 years.
Wow.
Yeah. I was pretty persistent at it. But
I remember Dad telling me that you were a substitute teacher for him one time.
Yeah. Hey, your dad, I want to tell you something about. He was one of the nicest kids I've ever met. He still is. And he said something to me one time about he did some bratty things. And I said, David, all kids do bratty things. And sometimes it's not just they do it and they stop doing it. They do it consistently sometimes for long periods of time. That's just the way it is. It's part of growing up. I'm not excusing it, but I'm telling you that's just the way it is. I had a cousin. I was in love with her. I mean, she was a wonderful person. I lived with her and her mother, and she was one of the brattiest kids I ever knew when her mother was around. But when her mother was gone, she was wonderful. I punched her in the face, too. I was playing the piano one day when I was about 10 or 11 or 12 years old, and she come over and tried to make me stop playing. She tried to close the piano up on me, so I just busted her one. The truth of the matter is, I whipped all the girls in the family. Isn't that awful? But they're the only ones that bothered me. They thought that was because they was older than me, they could boss me around. I wasn't going to stand for that. Yeah.
So you went, and how often would you teach? And did you only teach history?
Oh, no.
Or was that just like your favorite subject?
That was my favorite subject, but you know, when you're a substitute, you just go wherever they tell you. You're just a babysitter.
Yeah.
Once in a great while, you get a chance to teach. I had a guy that had an automobile accident, and he was laid off for quite a while, and I took his place in Jackson Elementary. I don't even know if they still have. I don't think they still have that school anymore, but I was up there for a while. But usually just one day at a time, and so that's what I was doing when I had David. So I went to Frankton, I went to LaPel, I went to Anderson Highland, I went to Anderson High School, I went to Madison Heights, and just a day at a time. But sometimes I'd work 3 or 4 days a week at that. It was an interesting experience, but a lot of times all you did was just, like one time I went to Anderson High School, and the vice principal took me over to the class. I was going to teach shop. What do I know about shop? So when we got over there to the classroom, he said, stay out here in the hallway for just a few minutes. I want to go in and talk to him and by myself. And I said, okay. So he was a super person. And so he went in there and he talked to him. He came back out and he said, now look, these guys, they're going to talk. They're going to walk around the room. They eat a candy bar, whatever they do. He said, but they're not going to cause you any trouble. And if they do, don't do anything except come over to the office, and I'll take care of it. I said, okay. And listen, I went in there, sat down at the desk. That was all there was to it. They did just exactly like he said. So, and that wasn't the only time that ever happened.
Hmm.
Same thing happened at Madison Heights, and because I had trouble with some of these kids, but and like I went to when David had him one time. He was in grade school at Frankton. Yeah, Frankton, and this teacher said to me, or the vice principal or someone said to me, said, "Now here's your desk," and he pulls the desk door open, and there's a paddle in there. And he said, "You know, if these kids get out of hand, but don't be afraid to use this thing." And, you know, I said to myself, you know something, these kids are 11, 12, 13 years old. I'm not going to whip a kid that's 11, 12, 13 years old. All it does is make them worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're way past that.
Mm-hmm.
They're starting to be young adults. I'm not going to give any kid a licking. I've never had given one licking now, and I'm not going to start today. But I didn't say that to them. They walked out of the room, and I had trouble with those kids. When I had one, you know, usually I'd talk to them, and that was the end of it, because I didn't mess around. When I told them something to do something, I didn't mess around. I made sure they knew I was serious about it. And if they caused me any trouble, I didn't mess with them. I just went straight to the office. I said, you march yourself down to the principal's office. And they did. So that was all there was to it. And, you know, I did that in high school. I did that in junior high. I did it in grade school. But I never really had that much trouble. I had the kids on the playground one time. I was in Jackson. And these teachers come up and said, take this whistle. Said, during the lunch period, we have to stagger the lunch period. So now these kids were like sixth graders. Mm. So, you know, they were, 12 years old?
Yeah.
And said, if these kids start getting out of hand, you blow the whistle and get their attention. And yeah, okay. And I thought to myself, I'm not blowing that whistle. How many guys have had this whistle in their mouth? So I was out there on the grounds waiting for them to take their turn to go in for lunch. So they came out and said, okay, it's you guys' turn. So I told them to go in and have lunch. So they did. So later on, believe it or not, this teacher come up to me and said, did you have those kids out there on the playground before lunch period? I said, yes. They said, how did you get them to come in? I said, I told them to come in. And that was it? Yeah, that was it. And I wanted to say to them, you know what? If you treat them like babies, they're going to act like babies. But I didn't say that. But that's exactly what I was thinking. I told them to come in, and they came in. So then I had to make out the grades because I was there for a while. And two of those guys in my class were making straight Fs. But in my class, they made straight As. Believe it or not. And I got called down for that, too. Said, you gave these guys straight A's. And I said, there's the books. That's what they earned. You told me to make the grades out of this book, and this is the book. You can see what they did in this classroom.
Probably asking you how you got them to participate.
Yeah. So. The kids were smart. I mean, they were really smart. When I was teaching in Anderson High School, I ran into some of those kids up there, and we became friends. I mean, I really liked a lot of those kids. But, of course, I was older, man. I was 29 when I started college. So, you know, I was probably 40 years old when I was teaching these kids. So I didn't have to learn how to do that because I knew about kids. I had family of my own. So it was a different experience. But you'd have thought I took some of that into the service, but I didn't. You know, I'd learned some of that stuff beforehand, but maybe I learned a lot of that while I was in the service. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, what would you say as a history fan is your favorite topic of history to study?
Oh, I've written a couple of books. Did you know that?
Dad told me that you've written a couple of books.
Well, one of them was I wrote a really extended story about B-17 bombers.
Yeah, he told me that one.
And it really got involved, and I had to do a lot of history. And, of course, I already knew a lot of it, but I had to do a lot of – and I've got a library in there, World War II library, and it's pretty extensive. And especially on the United States Air Corps and the Air Force. And so I already knew a lot of that stuff before I ever started. But that was really my favorite subject. But the funny thing is about that is long before I ever talked about going to college, when I was working at Ramey's, I remember this kid was on the janitor gang with me, and he said to me, what kind of stories do you like anyway? You can do a lot of reading, because I always carried a paperback in my back pocket. And I said, I like these war stories. And I said, someday I'm going to write a history about the causes of war. And that's exactly what I did, too. So that's in that book. It's a story, of course, and it's a novel. But at the same time, I know what the causes of war are. It's built into us. It's built into us. We just can't keep from doing it. It's insanity. It is. Wars are insane. It's just built into our system, though. It's that war that goes on between good and evil. And people get into the evil. And once the shooting starts, well, you got to shoot back. So, even if you're totally innocent, you have to fight the wars. That's all there is to it. So, and you may think because the way my position about the Army, when I didn't like it because it was too regimented. At the same time, you have no idea how much respect I have for people that serve. I have tremendous respect for them. These civilians that don't have any contact with the military, they have no idea what these kids give up to go into the service. They have no idea what these career people go through, them and their families, to make a career in the military. They have no idea the sacrifices they make, moving around all the time and going to different schools all the time and taking all the crap they have to take when they transfer from one post to another. Do you know what these officers go through when they go to a new post? They have to report to the commanding general, and then he comes out to their house unexpected. So they have to keep their house in order all the time. So when he shows up, so if you're a first or second lieutenant, or a new captain on a junior officer, that's the kind of crap you have to put up with. So they have no idea that stuff goes on. But because I was a private and I had to work in those areas, I found out about that stuff. Because I was always over there cleaning something up, in one of those guys' areas over there. I do have a tremendous amount of respect for people that serve in the military.
I think it's interesting that, as much of maybe a rebellious mind that you had for the military, not really conforming mentally to it, still having a huge amount of respect and still having a huge interest in like World War II. And I think it's fascinating because you lived that history.
Yeah.
Like you were there. Like when I'm interested in it, it's almost like, I don't want to say it doesn't seem like it's not real, but I didn't live through that time. So I read about it, and it seemed, reading these stories about these great heroes and stuff, the stuff that the paratroopers did back in that day just blows my mind. But it's generations before me, so I don't know. I don't really have a question about it. It's just kind of interesting because you're fascinated by this war that happened in your lifetime that you've studied.
Well, I understand that, believe it or not, because I got books on World War I got books on the Civil War. So I know what it costs guys to serve in the military. And the civilians out here, they don't give this stuff a second thought for the most part.
Yeah, I've
These
realized
come back with their legs missing and big chunk out of their face, and maybe an arm missing or something, or they've been gassed in World War I, and they're still suffering from that. And they didn't have any concept. They didn't think they was going to get hurt. Nobody thinks they're going to get hurt.
Right.
And then another thing is they think the military is going to take care of them, but they're not. They're not going to take care of them, but they think they are. I mean, so they show the loyalty, but the service doesn't show the loyalty to them. Have you ever heard this story about this sharpshooter by the name of Hathcote that was in the Marine Corps?
Carlos Hathcock?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He had about 2 or 3 months to go, and they drummed him out of the service. It might have been a little bit more than that, but anyway, they put him out. All they had to do was just let him hang around, and he could have got a full pension, a 20-year pension. And then they talk about how Marines take care of each other. And you know who did that? Some high brass did that. These guys down on their level, they understood that stuff. They would have kept him, took care of him until his time was up. But the brass, when they get up to the top, they're living in another world.
Making changes just for the sake of making changes.
And which is a kind of a funny thing too, because I worked with some guys that were from West Point, and I worked with guys who were OCS, and some of those West Pointers were wonderful people. I'm kidding. They were great guys, smart. Some of them were really smart. All of them I knew from West Point. All of them were good officers, all of them. And so I had a lot of respect for them. I knew guys was in the ROTC, and I mean, the best officer I ever served was ROTC. Man, he was sharp. I mean, you couldn't get him lost. Man, he could read a map in a heartbeat. And he'd see the smallest little thing, and he'd say, see, that's where we are right here. See that thing out there in the field? That's where we are. And and he'd go get, like, we'd be, I was a radio operator, and we'd pull in someplace for the night, and he'd take my canteen and go fill it up for me. And, I mean, who does that? A first lieutenant takes care of a PFC.
Yeah. Well, I kind of share your sentiment on like the civilian populace. They're basically just totally oblivious to the sacrifices of the military, and it seems crazy to me because I'm so obsessed with it. And then talking to some people, and just realizing that they have no interest whatsoever in anything that the military does. Maybe it's because I was raised in Dad's household where I just grew up with all this military stuff on the wall, but. I know that when I got out of active duty, I was pretty bitter. I was 22 or 23, and I do remember the day I got out, I was like the happiest person in the world, like you said you were. I remember I changed in the parking lot. I was still on post, on base, and I was in my uniform, just got my DD-214 and everything, and Dad was there to pick me up, and I went out to his truck, and I took my uniform off and put civilian clothes on before we even left. Yeah, and then we drove home from North Carolina, drove back here. But
you're still in the military till you get.
Well, yeah, in the inactive reserve, but at least you're not under UCMJ action. Yeah. I think. Yeah. But I took a year off as well before coming back into the Guard. But I remember going through a lot of bitterness and resentment, and looking at the kids that I went to high school with because I came back to the same area, and I'd go hang out with the same friends I went to school with, but. Realizing we had nothing in common
in common.
And they don't understand. Like, I can't communicate with them because, the lack of filter that you speak with in the military, you can't speak like that here. You can't say the same kind of jokes. And they just totally different life experiences. Like, I turned 20 in Afghanistan, and then I come back here, and then these kids are still, like, in their sophomore year of college or something like that. And the things that are at the forefront of their mind are so totally different and really just like small in comparison to the things that you're concerned about in the military. It's like you're concerned about a grade and you're going to Afghanistan trying not to die. Yeah. But for a while I had a hard time respecting people that didn't go into the military. It was like you're enjoying these freedoms that you didn't earn. And it took me a long time to come around and that way of thinking was just out of naivety and immaturity, but then learning to appreciate those people because, appreciating that people can be like that in this country because this country is so great that people don't have to go serve. If you choose, you can be blissfully oblivious to all the bad things in the world. And there are people who are going to volunteer to go for you to face all that evil. And you can just stay here and never have anything to do with it. Never have it cross your mind besides what you see on the TV from time to time. And so I've had a real hard time getting along with any of my friends back from high school when I came home. But since then I've learned to I've grown up and stopped being all bitter and resentful and stuff and just learned to appreciate it.
Being bitter doesn't do you any good.
Yeah. Well, I have a lot of people come up, a lot of people that maybe Dad works with, and they know that I was in the military, or kids now, now that I'm getting into my later 20s, that are like, well, I wish I would have gone in. And it's like they say it in a way that almost feels like they're like apologizing or they're asking for my approval or something like that. And it's just like, you don't have to go in. It's not for everybody. And you don't got to feel bad for not going in. That's why everybody else that went, that's why they went, so that you wouldn't have to go, because our country is so great that you don't have to face that dark side of humanity is the way I kind of look at it. Not just the culture, but the things that you could potentially be exposed to. Because even, you said you weren't in combat, but you still had people dying on jumps. There's still
Oh, yeah.
Death is still there in the military. Death and injury, and yeah, I just don't know why people feel bad about not going into the military and stuff like that.
Well, they do the same thing with other things. I mean, they do the same thing with some people that have more education than they do, and they make like it's some big deal.
Yeah.
And I tell people all the time, I say, if they find out I got a master's degree, I've got a master's degree. You know why I got it? Because I wanted to. It doesn't have anything to do with anybody else.
Yeah.
I just wanted to do it. I know why I did it. I know why I got started, and I know how, I went through and decided to do what I did, and I know why I stopped too. I thought about getting a doctorate. And I said, well, that doesn't make any sense. It's not going to do anything for me, so I didn't do it. And it was going to be expensive and a lot of hard work, and I said, I'm not going to do that. So it's all about the individual. You got a right to be yourself. And I worked with guys on the labor gang and the janitor gang when I was at the factory for almost 40 years. And they all talked about me, all of them. What are you doing here with a master's degree? What are you doing here? I said, I'm doing the same thing you are. These dirty, filthy jobs that nobody else wants, that are dangerous, and I'm getting paid for it. And I'm going to tell you something else. I like it.
That's so interesting that you dropped out of high school, then you go into the military, you become a paratrooper, and then you get out and you go and get a master's degree, and then you become a janitor.
Yeah.
It's like everything that you do in your life seems counter to the next step that you end up taking.
I was looking for work, and when the guy said, well, we only got one job open, and that's being a janitor, I said, I'll take it. I wanted to work. I needed the money. And so I took the janitor's job. And as soon as I got enough seniority that I could get on the labor gang, which paid more, and it was more dangerous too, by the way, I took that job too. So, and then I moved back and forth between the janitor and the labor gang because I was trying to go to school at the same time, and I needed some time to myself. And a lot of times on the labor gang, you worked in pairs all the time, and I didn't have any time to myself. So I'd move back to the janitor gang until I got over these hurdles, and then I'd go back on the labor gang again. I liked it. I don't care what they said. And some of those jobs are really dangerous, too. Really dangerous. But you had to be careful and watch what you were doing. And I had a few times when I'd tell the supervisor, I said, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing that. I had one tell me one time to go out in a thunderstorm and clean out this place in the sewer where it was stopped up. I said, I'm not going out there. That lightning dancing around like that. I said, as soon as it quits that, I'll go out there and clean that grate off. But I'm not going now. He said, okay. I mean, but did any of the rest of the guys do that? He said, he'd tell those guys, you go out and clean that grate off. And they all went out there, the lightning dancing around. Do you know we had guys killed doing that? It wasn't going to get me killed like that. Nuh-uh. I mean, I worked on some jobs where I had hot metal running over the top of my head. If that thing would have spilled, it would have killed me instantly. It's just part of the job.
So you said you did that for almost 40 years, that job?
Yeah. So, and I liked it.
Is that where you retired out of ultimately?
Yeah. Well, they finally combined the two trades, the janitors and the laborers, until we were... And they had what they called oilers and chippers too. So they combined all three of those, and I was doing all three of them. But at the same time, you're talking about being independent. I was red hot union. I'm not kidding you. I was just like John Gillespie. I mean, we were two peas in a pod. You believe it? I believe in the union. I don't believe in arbitrary power. That's what I didn't like about the military. It was so arbitrary. Yeah. And they, did seem like they couldn't be accountable. I got called on the carpet. I got cussed and screamed and hollered at, and I hadn't done anything wrong. And why? Because two or three of these E4s lied about me. I hadn't done anything, they said. But did I say anything to that guy who was chewing me out? No, I didn't, because I knew it wouldn't do any good.
Yeah.
They wasn't going to believe me.
Guilty until proven innocent.
Yeah. So, and I pulled their guard duty for them because the guy said I was being punished for it. I pulled a hard labor that they were supposed to be doing, supposed to be sharing with me. I never said a word. I just did it.
Just bite the bullet.
Yeah, bite the bullet.
Picking your battles on that.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, so what age did you retire at, and what have you been doing since then with your time?
See, I was 63 when I retired. I didn't want to retire, but General Motors was they were pulling some fast deals off. They was changing the company around, selling parts of it off, and they kept telling us General Motors would take care of us and all that. I didn't believe them. And so I retired when I had a chance to go out under a General Motors contract and collect my pension from General Motors. So I wasn't quite old enough to get Social Security, so I was 63 and a half. And so I only had a year and a half to go until I could get Medicare. And so I just took the chance and I retired. And I never regretted it either. But I make more money, to tell you the truth, because I retired when I did, because I took their advice when to retire. The guy I worked for is a good friend of mine. He lives in Indianapolis now. He's a millionaire. And he told me, he said, you can do what you want to, but if you hang on for another 3 months, you're going to make a lot more money in retirement. And I said, okay. So I hung on. He wasn't kidding. My paycheck is $400 a month more than it would have been if I'd have retired 3 months earlier.
Wow.
So he gave me some good advice. I tried to help him too, because I knew the right people. We just happened to be good friends. And this guy worked for the president of the union. And the president of the union and I were really close friends. And one day the president said to me, he said, I'm thinking about hiring this guy to run the insurance part, the benefits section. He said, what do you think about me getting him to run the department? I said, I don't think you could make a better choice. Well, he found out about it. So here's what he said to me. I owe you a lot. Now, see, that's gratitude. And I was grateful that he said that, but the truth of the matter is I think he would have hired him anyway. But anyway, he said, I owe you a lot. And I said, you know, Phil, you don't owe me anything, because I listened to you. In the last so many years that I've been retired, I've made over $100,000 more than I would have if I hadn't taken your advice. And so I'm $100,000 richer because of that. So you don't owe me anything. If anybody owes, and besides that, I think David was going to hire you as the benefits section head anyway, because that's what he told me. He said, I was thinking about it. So, I'm not so sure he wouldn't have hired you anyway. But yeah, I spoke up for you. But so, sometimes things work out good, believe it or not.
So you just been enjoying your time off since then, or just keeping yourself busy with these other projects?
Yeah, I always stayed busy until I got sick. And I had that prostate cancer in 2000, and I was down for about 3 years. I built this room back here, and it took me all 3 years to build it. Yeah, because I can only work an hour, maybe 2 hours at a time. And the interesting thing is, I talked to a radiologist just the other day, and he told me, I said, how long does that radiation stay in your body? And he said, well, you didn't have any radiation in your body after a couple of months. He said, it was all gone. I said, well, why was I sick for 3 years? I don't know. But I was sick for 3 years. So it took me a while to get it, but I had to do something. I couldn't sit still. But if I'd sit down, I'd go to sleep. And it wasn't funny, I'll tell you. I quit going to church. I didn't go to church. I didn't go anywhere for 3 years except family stuff. I'd go to have lunch or something with people in the family. I didn't do anything for 3 years. I got the shock of my life when they told me it'd come back on me. So
that was just very recently?
Yeah. I just found that out. I think I found that out in March. But I got sick at the end of December. And, the medical profession, and they are so incompetent. It's unreal. You think the military's bad. In order for me to get the treatment that I wanted, I had to go over their heads. So I called the UAW and said, how come I'm not getting this treatment? And the woman on the other end of the line said, I'll tell you what, when I'm done with you, you're going to get the treatment. And so I stayed on the telephone with her for a long time, and she made these three-way calls, and she wasn't kidding. And she called him sometimes as high as 3 times while we were still on the line. The same person.
That's
And when
good.
she got done, she said, well, you're on your way. He said, you just do what I just told you to do. This doctor's going to call you, and he's going to make an appointment, and he's going to take care of you.
I feel like a lot, like that's something that the military taught me, is that if you go and ask somebody for something in your own best interest, you ask them for help and they don't give you the answer you want, just go ask somebody else.
Yeah.
Keep asking somebody until you get the answer you want.
And like one guy that I listen to all the time said, don't mess around, go to the top if you can.
Yeah.
Of course, you can't always do that in the military, but
yeah. But
I put money in the soldier's deposit when I was in Germany, and then they didn't pay me any jump pay, and well, of course I wasn't making any money because I was sending it all home. I was married, and so I went to the company commander and I said, they tell me I have to get your permission to get some money out of the soldier's deposit, and I'd like to have a little money to hold me over. All I wanted was $20 or $30, and he said, no, I'm not going to do it. And he said, you can get by. And he didn't. And he really was a pretty good company commander, to be honest with you. But when it comes to that money, he said, no, I'm not going to do that. I guess I should have been grateful, because when I got out of the service, that's just that much money I had coming, out of the, do they still have soldier's deposit?
They have, is that like an emergency loan kind of thing?
No, it's a bank.
They have something now called AER, but it's a loan. It's the Army Emergency Relief. And so if you find yourself in financial struggles, you apply for it. It has to go through your commander and everything, and then you request a certain amount of money. So like for me, I actually had to use it when I was on active duty, because I had a Jeep Wrangler that the transmission died on me, and I didn't have the money to replace the transmission, so I went and requested an AER loan, and they spotted me like $3,000 for this transmission. But then it had to go directly from the dealership to my company commander. They worked it out. He sent the check directly to the dealership. And then the Army started taking bits of pay out of my paycheck every time to pay that loan off. It was interest-free, but they just took a little bit of money out of my paycheck every 2 weeks to pay that loan off.
That is neat, though. That's good.
It's a great program.
Yeah.
But that's what they have now. I don't know if they have something you can just go get a little bit of money here or there, but that's got to be something that's you got to go through all your levels of chain of command that has to get approved, and it has to be, you have to show that you can't afford that thing. That's what you have to show, that you actually need the AER loan. So yeah. I was just showing, like, this is how much money I have. This is how much this transmission is going to cost, and I can't afford it. I just bought this car for $14,000, and it looked great, low mileage. And then, like 6 months later, the transmission completely died on me, and so I didn't have the money to cover it. But they have other programs now. They've come a long way with a lot of their programs to help their soldiers.
Well, I'm glad to hear it.
And a lot of transition stuff too. The transition stuff still needs a lot of work, but a lot of these guys that went into the Army at 18, they're getting out at 38 or maybe into their 40s, and they've never been an adult in the civilian world. They've only ever been an adult in the military. So
I know, I had a cousin who did that.
Yeah, and it's hard. It was hard for me just after 4 years to transition out. I still feel like there's still things I'm learning. So
my cousin couldn't do anything for himself. He couldn't even put a wall socket in. That's the truth. He had to hire everything done because, and he was sharp in the military. He was a master sergeant when he got out, and he had served at unknown soldier in Washington, D.C., and he had top military secrecy clearing. I mean, he had some really responsible jobs, but as far as, he didn't know anything except the Army.
Yeah, if you get out and you've never known anything but that, there's a very big difference between being in the military and then being an adult in the civilian world. So you can be 38, and I have guys that I served with that now we're on social media, on the internet and stuff, and they'll talk about the jobs that they're going to get. My Army experience is going to help me get this job, and I'm just like, nobody cares. People don't care about your experience. You could be a cook, or you could be a paratrooper, or you could have no combat experience. You could have 10 deployments of combat experience, and it's all the same to the civilian world. They don't. They just don't know.
They don't understand.
Yeah, they don't know, and they never have had to use a resume to go and get a job from a civilian employer.
Yeah.
So they have a program now that you have to go through. You can't get out of the Army unless you've been through it. And they teach you how to interview. They teach you how to write a resume. They teach you how to dress. You actually don't go in uniform. They actually tell you to come in business casual attire and civilian clothes so you can learn how to dress for interviews. And it's good. I think it still needs some work, but the intent is there to help these guys get out. Because guys get out and they have no plan. They're just, all they know is kind of like what you said. We're just like, I don't care, I just want out. And they just get out with no plan whatsoever. And those are the guys that end up homeless, or they have nothing going for them. So they kind of make you develop a plan now before you get out.
Some of that I don't understand. I can understand that happened to some people, but like you said, when I got out, I didn't have a plan. And I tell you, when I got out, I worked on construction. I just took any job I could get. I worked in restaurants. I cooked, in restaurants. Worked in 2 different restaurants. I worked in a battery plant.
But it's your attitude. It's just when you get out, you don't have to have a plan necessarily. As long as you have your attitude is, you're going to go find work. If you just think that things are just going to happen for you, then
they're not going to.
You think that I'm a veteran, so things are just going to work out for me.
They don't care.
Yeah, I made my job when I got out. My job was getting a job, so I would go every day and apply, fill out applications all day long, and then the next day I would call all those places I just applied to and try to get an interview.
Yeah,
and that's. I had a month of terminal leave, which meant I was technically on leave the last month that I was in the Army, and so I just left and never had to come back, and I got a paycheck for the last month that I was in. So
that is neat.
I had money to live off of, but I was telling myself, I'm going to take a month off, and I'm just gonna relax and decompress. Well, I took a weekend off and was just bored out of my mind.
Sure, absolutely.
I was like, I gotta go. I can't just sit at home and do nothing. Like, it sounds good, but I got to find something to do with myself. So yeah, I just went out and and it only took me like 2 or 3 days to find a job, and I'm still working at FedEx now because it's a decent paying job, and it's not.
You wasn't working down there where they got those people killed, was you?
No, that was actually, it's kind of it's not a funny story, but it's kind of a funny story because that's not my terminal. I work at the terminal just north of it, just about 30 minutes north. That's the Indianapolis South terminal, and I work at the Indianapolis North terminal. It's about 30 minutes apart. And but I was actually at the National Guard doing training that whole week, so I had no idea what had happened. And I just wake up and I check my cell phone, and I have all these text messages and phone calls that I missed, and people saying, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I'm like, I don't even know what's going on. But they all thought I was at work. They thought that was my terminal that I worked at, and nobody knew that I was doing Army stuff, or I wasn't even there. So I was just saying, if it had been my terminal, it would have been a good time to be at the Guard that week to not even be there. But yeah, I guess I was fortunate. Terrible for what happened. But well, so we've kind of talked about everything about your life leading up to where you're at now. I'm kind of curious on how you perceive the younger generations now, and are you optimistic about the future for America as a whole, or just comparing the differences between how you grew up and then now how you're seeing these kids grow up, and what your outlook is on all that, what your opinion is.
I call myself an optimistic pessimist. I think these kids are a lot better than we think they are. And the reason I do, just to be quite frank with you, when World War II started, I heard the same stuff about these kids. Said they're all lazy and they don't know.
Is that just what every older generation says about the younger generation?
Yeah, and they turned out to be, well, they call them the finest generation now. That's the same ones that they were saying they couldn't hack it back then. I think there's a lot of good people out there, and you put them in the right circumstances, and you get them away from this civilian life and get them in the military in there and give them some training, and a lot of those people are just going to develop just like they should develop. So I don't have any problem with most of that. And another thing too is they sort them out. If they can see, they've learned what to look for, and so they sort them out. And so if they're not up to par, they just they get rid of them.
Yeah.
They send them home, So
Just check and make sure it's still.
I, for the most part, I have a lot of respect for the people that they put in the military, because I know that they're going to do a good job. And here's another thing too: is these civilians do not know what it means to be in a combat situation. Now, I was not in a combat situation, but I do know this: if you go into those places, because we trained going into those houses, and how to clear a house and stuff like that. Now, you go in there, if they move, you're going to kill them, because if you don't have time to think about it. So if you go in there and kill a few innocent people, that's just the way it is. You have to learn to live with it. Now, how would you like to do that? That's what I say to these civilians. How would you like to do that? How would you like to go into one of those houses, scared to death, you don't know what's coming on the inside of there, you jump in there and you see something moving, so you killed the wrong person, and now you got to live with it.
Yeah, I've heard something really interesting that I kind of agree with, and that this one guy is a Navy SEAL. I listen to, he does a kind of a podcast interview thing like this as well. He kind of laid it out that before we ever go to war, we need to accept, 3 things? The first is that innocent people are going to die. It's war, and it's going to happen. There's nothing that you can do. We can try and perfect our training, and a lot of our really high-level soldiers and SEALs that we have now are so highly trained that they can mitigate that from happening for the most part, and not killing innocent people. But we just have to accept that that's going to happen. The second thing is we have to accept that Americans are going to die. We're going to send our young people over to wherever, and not all of them are going to come back. It's just, those 2 things are guaranteed to happen. And the third thing, I can't exactly remember what the third thing was, but I remember that it had to do with success criteria. We need to have a success criteria so that we avoid being in like a never-ending war that we're in now, where we didn't wage war against a country, we waged a war against an ideology, and that's a way to stay in perpetual war. And you have to have these boxes that you lay out before we go to war, and when these boxes are all checked, people come home, and that's it. Because now we're at a point now where we're just going to be an occupational force in the Middle East forever, because I guess it's a mitigation technique. I don't really have an opinion on it one way or the other.
You can't win doing that.
Yeah.
There's no winning.
Well, then it's like prevention, I guess.
That's what they say.
Yeah.
I mean, you hope that's the way it works out. Like I said earlier, I have a lot of respect for those guys that they don't know what they're getting into, but they handle it well once they get in there. They don't send very many of these guys home. Most of those guys, they make it. And yeah, it takes a lot of adjustment. It took a lot of adjustment for me, but I still have a lot of respect for him. We got one of them that I go to church with down there. He's a 20-year man. In fact, he was in there for a little over 20, but he was in the 82nd Airborne and served in there for quite a while. He was an officer, and he finally made a company commander and all that. And he got out and went to a leg outfit. And then after he'd been there a while, he went back to the Airborne again. And I don't know why he did it, but that's what he did, and that's where he retired from. And I mean, I love talking to him. I mean, and I tell him the same thing I'm telling you. These people don't know what you went through, and the truth of the matter is they don't care. So, and I may care, but I can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't. I know what you're going through, and I can empathize with you, but that's not going to change your life any. So, but it's kind of nice to know that somebody understands, some of the stuff you're going through. Although I never was an officer, never wanted to be an officer. You know how it is between enlisted men and officers. At least it was for me. On the one hand, I had a lot of respect for them, and I always treated them like they were officers, the way you were supposed to be treated. And at the other end of the spectrum, I said I wouldn't want to be an officer, especially a junior officer, because sometimes those second lieutenants get treated worse than we do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I served with a lot of them because I was in an infantry outfit. served with all the second and first lieutenants. So
I was thinking that's what I've learned to appreciate over time is, the coming out of the military and being in the civilian population, these people just don't understand. They don't understand the sacrifice or what your life experiences are like. They don't even know how to talk about it.
No.
I remember right after I got back from Afghanistan, I had somebody, and I've always been very open about what we did over there, which wasn't a lot. I have pretty much no combat experience. We took mortars, but anybody that's been over there knows that mortars aren't a big deal. If anybody says that getting mortars is a big deal, then they're trying to make it sound more heroic than it really was. Mortars can be scary if they're getting close, but you just kind of accept that if it hits you, then it's done anyways. You're not going to realize what happened. So that's it as far as what happened on my deployment experience. But I was over at a buddy's house with a bunch of friends that I used to go to school with, and they knew that I had just gotten back, because this was on my post-deployment leave, so I just got back like 2 weeks ago. And still adjusting, even not being on a very kinetic combat deployment. There's still adjustments, and one of them asked if I had ever killed anybody. And then, but then everybody else was like, "Hey, you don't ask him that. You don't ask him that." I was like, "I don't care."
You know how many times I've been asked that? I wasn't even in combat.
But I was just like, "No, I didn't." I was never like were there requests that went up to engage targets? Like, yeah, that happened, but they were always denied. Nothing ever happened, and like, no. But then I tell those people that are like, "Oh, you don't ask them that." It's like, it's not that big of a deal. But it's just weird that they like tiptoe around those certain topics. And it's nice when you run into a veteran, that instant connection that you have with that person, because it's like finally somebody that can understand. It doesn't matter if you're in a different branch, different job, different, combat, no combat. You guys still have common ground that you can communicate with each other. And that's part of why I started doing this little thing here, is because I just love talking to veterans. It doesn't matter what generation, what job, what branch. I just love making that connection and then recording the conversation so that other people can see it. And we'll wrap up here in a minute, but I have to ask you for Dad, because he wanted me to ask you one thing, and this will be the last question that I'll ask you, but something he said he was going to ask you about anyways, but Grandma, if you had any like real quick stories about what it was like being a kid with Grandma, his mom, and what she was like as a little girl, if you have any stories that come to mind that you could tell about her.
About Betty?
Yeah. What kind of person she was like as a girl growing up, or if you have any funny experience.
It took me a long time to really see Betty the way she really was. It really did. When I was a kid, I didn't try to analyze her and figure out why she did what she did. And Betty had some hang-ups, She was jealous of my cousin Virginia, because Virginia had got everything she wanted, and her mother gave her new clothes and spent money on her like crazy, and Betty was jealous of her. And it was so obvious, too. And yet they became good friends, as they got into adulthood. But and then she had that same problem with some other people in the family, too. I don't know if she thought they didn't like her. I think Betty had an inferiority complex, personally. And yet, she was tough. I'm not kidding you. Betty was tough. If you knew the crap that she put up with when she had all those kids by herself, and John really wasn't being a very good husband sometimes. And I say that kind of reluctantly, because I thought the world of John. I really liked him. And I liked his whole family, to be honest with you. I knew all the Gillespies, and I never knew any of them that I didn't like. And they were, especially Russell. Man, he was a tremendous. But John, I really had a lot of admiration for John, but he got caught up in that union thing. And I'm a red hot union guy myself, but those guys, they got to feeding off each other, and they got to drinking and chasing and doing stuff like that. And John got in trouble for it. Well, a lot of them did. Lost their marriages, and a lot of them did over that same silly stuff. and it was too bad. And Betty never ever talked to me about it. She never said one word to me about it. The only time I ever knew anything about it was when she was talking to somebody else, and I did just hear snippets, about. But for instance, he wouldn't. She said he didn't provide enough money for them to eat on. That's pretty tough, and so she had to improvise and make stuff go a long ways, and come up with something for those kids to eat, and she didn't whine and cry around about it. She did what she had to do and got on with life. In the same way, when they finally decided to break up housekeeping, she didn't have the skills that she needed because she quit school. She didn't have the skills she needed to go out and really make a living. She tried to get on at Remy's, and John, being a big shot in the union, he stopped it. They could do that, and he did it. And she could have had a good income there,
Mm-hmm. It seemed like she struggled financially.
She did struggle, life. And she struggled up to the day she died. She was still struggling. She never had any money, but she never cried and whined around about it. When she had an opportunity to get some food, like out somebody's garden or cherry trees or pear trees or something, she grabbed that and put it up, so they'd have something to eat. And she took care of those kids, and the way she should have taken care of them. And a lot of times John wasn't around, He was out gallivanting around doing something. I don't know what he was doing. And Gabby did the same thing, by the way. Both of them got caught up in that same thing. But, I knew all of those guys. I knew all of them. And I knew what they were doing, and they all got in trouble. Some of them managed to save their marriages, but just by the skin of their teeth. But Betty, she toughed it out. And Betty was a person that she was just like me. Just like Florence, all of us. We went job hunting. We found a job. When she met John, she was working in the Boys Cafe up on 11th Street in downtown Anderson. And that's where she met John, I'm sure it is. And he had just quit school in his senior year. You're talking about silly. He could have had a skilled trades job and made a lot more money at Remy's. And it looked like it was really going to work out pretty good. And John was really good to me. He took me to Vandalia, Illinois one time with him. And, I was only about 12 or 13 years old, and I went down there and stayed with his family down there. I don't remember how long, several days. And I never heard, Betty never badmouthed John around me. So, I think she was tough, and she just took her licks and went on. So I don't know what you can say about her besides that. But she was also very tender. She was very tender, and I didn't know that until the last 5 or 6 years she was alive. I never caught on. But she never acted like she wanted my attention that I thought. Now, Florence was a lot more affectionate. I was a lot closer to Florence. But in the last 5 or 6 years when she was living up there with Florence, I began to catch on to her because I know she wanted me to hug her and she wanted me to talk to her. And so the last few years she was alive, even when she went to Texas, I spent a lot of time on the telephone talking to her because I knew she needed that. Well, and I needed it too, She was my sister. It's just a dirty shame that things turned out the way it did. But let me tell you something about trouble. All of us have trouble, and it's never going to go away. And if you're not in trouble today, you're going to be in trouble tomorrow. If you're not in trouble today, you either just got out of trouble or you're heading for trouble. That's life. Mm-hmm. That's life, and you have to learn to deal with it. So nobody wants to hear your story. Everybody's got a story. Poor me. I can tell you about how I got mistreated in the military. Big deal. Who cares? Nobody cares. And why should they? They got their own story. They got their own. They was mistreated too. They got troubles too. We all have troubles. That's the life we live. And there's a scripture in the Bible that talks about that too, and it's pretty straightforward. It says, "In this life," Jesus said, "in this life you're going to have trouble," and he said, "You're going to suffer, but just hang on, because there's a great day a-coming. Now, he didn't use those words, but that's what he said. There's a great day a-coming, and I'm going to deliver you. And I'm not talking about you not dying, because physically you are going to die. But didn't I tell you, if you believe in me, you'll never die? And that's what I believe. And I don't know how people get through life that don't understand that. I just don't know. I mean, I lived a long time before I ever came to that understanding, but it makes it a lot easier when you're dealing with people too, and especially when you realize, like I heard a preacher say one time, don't get upset with these people because they do things that are hurtful to you. Don't you know why they're doing that? They can't help it. They got the devil in there working on them. So who's really doing it? It's the devil inspiring them to do this silly stuff. And when they walk away from you after they've done something really hurtful, how do you know how they feel? They may feel terrible about it after they've mistreated you. So don't go on spending your whole life being bitter towards somebody. I'm going to tell you something. I am a very forgiving person. I never hold a grudge against anybody. I just will not do it. You destroy yourself doing that. You don't hurt them a bit, and you'll destroy yourself. So I don't have any enemies. If they're enemies, well, that's the way they want it, but not the way I want it. I'm not going to have any enemies. That's all there is to it. And if they want to change their mind and come back to me after, maybe they think they've mistreated me all this time, well, yeah, I'm right here. So, if you want to make a change, why, I'm willing to listen to you. If I can't get along with you, I'll stay away from you. If that's what it takes. But, I know you got troubles. I know, because I'm a human being just like you. I know you got troubles. And they're not going to go away. They are not going to go away. You get out of one trouble period, and you're going to have a little respite, and then you're going to have another one.
Maybe sometimes you have a lucky streak and you don't have any trouble for a little while. But
yeah. Man, I'm on top of the world. When I was going through this sickness recently, one of the things that kept happening to me was one day I'd have a great day, and I'd think, man, I'm starting to recover, and I'm doing really great. And the next day the bottom would fall out. And that happened over and over and over and over. So, it was a lesson, a time for learning. And I learned a lot about myself and about God when I was going through that stuff. So, at the same time, when I was in the service, I stayed to myself. I only had 2 friends all the time I was in there, 2. And they weren't real close. But I just learned to live with myself, and I took care of myself, and I didn't go whining to somebody else when things didn't go right, and I made it through it. And when my time was up, I came home, and I said, I've had enough of that. So that was the end of that. So I worked with some people that I really thought the world of. I thought they were fabulous. One of the first sergeants I had was one of the most wonderful persons I ever met in my life. I'm not kidding. He was really a good first sergeant. And he had been my platoon sergeant at one time. But he saw that I was willing to do the work, and I didn't flunk any of those Army training tests and stuff. I did everything like I was supposed to. And some of the guys that he'd been trying to train, and they flunked it. And he got on him about it too. He said, this guy, he just came into the unit here and he passed this test, and you've been training on this for months and you can't pass these tests. So, I met some terrific people there, and then I met some guys that were real buttholes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that's just, that's life. So you have to learn to live with it, and the sooner you learn those lessons, the better off you're going to be. But whining and crying around and feeling sorry for yourself, that don't get it. That does not help anything. Absolutely nothing. So those people may be a lot better than you think they are anyway. One of the scriptures that, in the Bible that talks about it said Jesus died for the ungodly. He didn't come back. He didn't come down here and die for the people that were good people. And he said so. He said, I didn't come here to rescue the good people. I came here to rescue the ungodly. So, and he said, you be like me. So what's that tell you? Well, be like me. Don't get bitter over these people. Look through them and see what's causing them to do this stuff. Maybe they got problems you never dreamed of. So I heard this preacher, Adrian Rogers, one time say that he went into a restaurant and this waitress treated him like dirt. And she brought his meal to him and just kind of threw it at him. when he got ready to leave, he gave her a $20 tip. And she started crying. She said, "Why'd you do that?" He said, "Well, I figured you was having a tough day, and so I was going to make it easier for you. I hope it worked." And she said, "Well, it did." So,
Never know what people are going through.
Yeah, you don't know what they're going through. So
makes it easy to forgive people that way. If you just imagine that everybody that mistreats you is just having a hard time.
Yeah.
They're in that period of trouble.
Yeah.
And they might be taking it out on somebody, but...
And you can always find somebody that's worse off than you are.
That's very true.
I talked to one of these...
You don't even have to look that hard.
You don't have to look that far. I was talking to one of the people. We got people that bring food over here once in a while for us, so I don't have to cook. I'm a terrible cook. And I was asking her about her dad, and he's about my age, and she said, "He can't swallow." Now, how would you like to live with that? He can't swallow. She said that he never knows. He tries to eat sometimes, and everything works all right. And the next time he tries to eat, it comes right back up. He just can't get it past his esophagus in here. Now, how would you like to live like that? But what's the same guy do? He has a huge garden, and he gives it all away.
I heard a saying one time that really resonated, and I think it was, a healthy man wants 1,000 things.
Yeah.
But a sick man wants one thing. And that kind of like, just letting that sink in a little bit.
At my stage in life, I have no desire to own anything anymore. You wouldn't believe the stuff I've given away. At one time, I counted the guns that I owned. I owned 21 different guns. And I have given away a bunch of them. I sold a couple of them because the guy wanted them, because I sold my hunting rifle that I hunted out west with. I sold a double-barrel shotgun that was worth $1,000. I paid $500 for it myself. But this guy wanted it, and so I gave it to him. And I said, "I'll settle up with you later." He never paid me for it. He will. And if he doesn't, I don't care.
You're just at a point in your life where you're realizing that possessions are arbitrary. And
I had a .45 automatic, a llama in perfect shape, looked like it was brand new. I gave it away. I gave it away to a friend of mine. He wanted it, so I gave it to him. And I gave your dad 2 guns that belonged to my dad. I told him I would years ago. I said, "When I get ready, I'll give you that shotgun." And he came over to get the shotgun, and I said, "Would you like to have his rifle?" And he said, "Yeah." And so I gave him the rifle. And before he left, I said, "I've still got his revolver. Would you like to have that revolver?" And he said, "Yeah, if you want me to have it, I want it." So I said, "I'll get it for you. It's in southern Indiana, but I'll bring it back to you."
Well, he said that he was just talking to me the other day. We've been real excited that I was going to get back with you and do this here. But he said that he wants to make it a whole day thing. He wants me to get a day off work. He's going to be off work, and then he said he'll drive, but he wants to take you and just us 3, maybe even Jake, if he can get the day off, and we'll go down there and see that house that you had built.
Well, if we can pull it off, that'd be great. But I'm going through this procedure now, and I got to get somebody to stay with Sandra.
Yeah. And
that's always a problem. But if we can pull it off, yeah, I'm willing to do that. In fact, I'd kind of like to do it,
Well, I mean, what do you say, 5 days? 5 days in a row that you have to get that treatment, right?
So I'd be free on the weekends.
Right. So we'll just do it on a weekend.
So if we can arrange that for the weekends, if we can find somebody to stay with Sandra, she's not going to like it. She's not.
Well,
Sandra is totally possessed with me. That's the truth. She's always been like that. She's been like that from the day we met. She's always been like that. She doesn't want me to. She wants me to give her all my attention. She's just like that. I accept it. Sometimes I get on her about it, but I never get upset to where I can't get over it. It's just a passing thing.
Well, how long do you say you guys have been married?
Well, 66 years.
66 years.
Yeah. So, she accepts me the way I am, and I accept her the way she is. That's just that simple. So.
Well, before we get too far down into another rabbit hole of something, I'm sure we can. I think we've been going for over 2 hours on this video thing. Yeah.
Wow.
They go fast. But I think this is the longest one I've done so far. I think by about 20 minutes too. So we'll wrap it up. I appreciate you taking time out of your day and sitting down with me, and I'm happy that we could get a chance to get back together anyways, because
Yeah.
for those who don't know, I haven't seen Uncle Leroy since before I left for the Army back almost 10 years ago now. So
Did you know I was out to your house, David's house, when you got out?
no.
I was there.
What, the day that I came home? Then I'm sure I gave you a hug or something.
I never saw you. I was there, and there was nobody home. I went up to the house. There was nobody in the house. There was a couple of fire trucks sitting out in front. You remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I hung around for, I don't know, maybe an hour, and nobody showed up, so I just left. And this is really interesting. So I went over to Chesterfield, to that filling station that's on 32, and I saw you turn the corner and go past the filling station and
So
hit
you went to the house when everybody was out there.
Yeah. I didn't know they was out there.
What, did you just go home after that?
Yeah, I just went home. Yeah, I was there. Your dad doesn't even know that.
Oh, well, he's going to be upset now that he's going to watch this, and he's going to...
Yeah.
Wow. I was just thinking, like, how would I have missed you? I went and made sure I shook every person's hand and gave everybody a hug. And
Yeah, it was kind of disappointing, but, the day was kind of getting late, and I forget how maybe I had something to do. I don't know. I can't remember. Anyway, I saw you go by. I said, there he goes, right there. I told Sandra. I was filling my car up with gas.
Wow. So you were there. You saw it, but you actually... I think that just fits in with your personality, though, being kind of reserved and just
Yeah.
staying to yourself.
You're pretty perceptive.
Well, I wish you would have actually been a part of it, so I could have given you a hug. Because I remember before I left on that, you telling me that you didn't like it and you didn't really much care for the Airborne. You didn't have too many words of encouragement before I left. When I was like, well, okay, I'm going anyways. But
Well, one of the things that I made it a point to do is after I got out of the service, these guys talk about going to the service. I used to always, do you know what you're getting into? I used to say that to them. You know what you're getting into? Because if you go in the infantry, you're going to have to kill somebody or they're going to kill you. So think about that. And if you're not up to that, then don't go in the service. So, you have to be willing to do that.
Yeah.
And, so I talked some guys out of it.
Well, a lot of that stuff doesn't even resonate until you get there. It doesn't seem like a real thing until you actually are in.
Yeah.
Because I tell you, when I was in basic training, I didn't think that less than a year later I'd be in Afghanistan, but I was. It's like, oh, this is real. I never actually thought I would be in a combat zone.
I did.
Somehow I thought going into the Army, seeing all these war movies, I never actually thought I would be in the war. And not that I actually contributed anyways, but it's like the idea of going over there blew me away. It was like, oh man, I didn't actually expect to ever actually
I was
go.
really concerned. I was afraid you'd get in there and get hurt. But
Well, I think it's the best thing that I ever did for myself. So
yeah, it worked out all right. So
so far, yeah.
yeah,
All right. Well, I appreciate you doing this, and
Yeah.
I don't know if you got
2
internet.
hours, yeah.
Yeah, but there's a lot of people that are, I posted on social media, so all the Texas family, all the Reels and Gillespies and everybody, and they're all waiting for me to post this on the internet so they
Really?
can watch it. I got a bunch of paratrooper buddies of mine that are all excited to hear your story. So you just said about 10 minutes ago that people don't care to hear your stories, but there's a lot of people that are excited to hear.
I love to
story.
tell stories too. You know that, don't you?
Well, Dad told me before I sat down with you, he's like, don't interrupt him too much. Once Uncle Leroy gets going, he just let him go. He'll just keep telling you story after story. And like I said in the very beginning, selfishly, you being, I guess, one of the patriarchs of the family at this point, to just let you tell your story. We want to preserve all your stories that you're willing to tell. So I'm happy that I got to just kind of let you go for a little bit.
When he was out here, I didn't know he liked that fudge. But I sent it to the girls all the
Dave
time.
Gillespie not liking fudge.
I said fudge 2 or 3 times a year to Kathy and Karen. I didn't know he wanted some of it.
Oh man, he's a closet sweets addict. He tries to fool people and make them think that he's this example of fitness and stuff, and he is. He's very disciplined with his diet. But I know when I was growing up, he'd have little Reese cup stashed up here. And he'd be disciplined that he might only take a little bite of it, but he would have sweets staged around the house. So, oh yeah, he's big into fudge.
Well, your dad is a wonderful person.
Well,
you don't think I'd have given him that shotgun if he wasn't?
Well, he's my best friend, so it's nice that he was a stern enough dad growing up. That,
he's a typical Gillespie, I'm telling you. They were all like that.
Well, he was stern enough as a dad when I was growing up that now it's awesome that we just get to be friends. So
yeah.
He and I think it's like our favorite thing to do is get together and hang out and just be buddies now.
Well, I'm glad we could do this. I'm surprised it took 2 hours.
Yeah, well, I'm sure Meredith and I'm sure Aunt Sandra are going to be wondering what's taking us so long.
Yeah.
So we better go make sure they're all right.
Okay.
But all right, I'm glad we got to do it.
Yeah, thanks.